Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and I'm so thrilled to welcome back the wonderful Nick Mohammed to talk all about Ted Lasso. And I actually, the thing I was really interested in to begin with is when you were playing Nate's arc through season one, one of the biggest challenges was how to make that storyline not peak too early and how to really balance it out episode by episode so that was that real build and evolution in him as a character. And then obviously with this season, you're kind of facing a similar challenge in that regard, but it's very non-linear in terms of the journey he's going on. Sometimes he's going in the right direction, sometimes he's going in the wrong direction. There's a lot of push and pull in different spaces. And so how were you able to take a lot of what you learned from approaching that specific challenge in season one into a space where it's a much more complex version of that in season two?
Yeah, that's good. That's a good question. I think, to be honest, I just asked lots and lots of questions, really. That was always... they're so good at planting these seeds along the way, and particularly with Nate's journey, some of those signals are there from season. Some of those key points in season two are kind of like hinted at in season one, even. So that often we would get to a scene and they would just remind me that this is important because XYZ is coming, even though sometimes I'd not read those scripts yet. But that this was going to mean something possibly more important a little bit further down the line. So, there was quite a lot of back and forth in season two. I guess there was sort of an element of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And then there's a definite sort of tipping point, I guess, around episode 5, 6, 7, where, certainly 7, where he's being mean and rude and maybe even a bit of a bully to Colin. And it's the first time I think we're seeing him really starting to sort of scroll through Twitter, and you can just see things starting to go to his head. And so that's quite a key point in his journey. But then there are definitely moments after that where it's like the kind of Nate that we kind of enjoyed or are more familiar with in season one kind of comes back, but only just for a moment. And then those moments, to be honest, get fewer and fewer. And it's all dependent on who he's with. I think when he's with Keeley, he becomes quite almost sort of innocent again, because he just doesn't. Well, he's never had any real relationship, but he certainly doesn't know how to speak to women, and then obviously he then just hugely ruins that relationship by completely overstepping the mark when she's just been kind to him and a good friend. So he's his own worst enemy, and he's definitely on a downward spiral towards the latter half of season 2 for sure.
And the seasons, the scenes with Keeley are quite interesting as well in terms of Nate's body language. And every time he goes into her office, he picks up like a fluffy cushion and kind of holds it to his chest as some sort of like weird pink fluffy armor for himself. And he's very kind of enclosed. What was a lot of the body language that you felt like was really important to explore? Because he's still in that place of insecurity this season, even with the added power. And then obviously going on that trajectory that we saw.
Yeah. I guess it was all about him trying to sort of, and I use this expression in a very kind of broad sense. I don't think this expression is a good one, but kind of to be a man, like what he thinks he needs to do to kind of become the alpha sort of person or the alpha male in the room. Because, a lot of what Nate has experienced, sadly, is a lot of elements of sort of toxic masculinity, not just because he was sort of bullied in the locker rooms by some of the footballers in season 1, but also a very toxic relationship with his dad. And so he is deeply, deeply insecure. But when he then does get that, ounce of responsibility and, maybe a bit of adoration from fans because he's sort of doing well as a coach, that very quickly goes to his head. And the only way he knows how to express that is by, I guess, lashing out or becoming a bully himself, or being inappropriate and making sort of casual sort of snipey remarks, because that's all he's known. And not to condone that behavior, but you do often, I think there's a sad reality to that often people who are victims of that kind of sort of constant, almost abuse is again possibly not the right word, but people who have very, very little sort of worth as a result of others' behavior around them, then when they sort of feel that they've come out of that cycle, they end up sort of repeating all the problems that were effectively done on them, and they sort of almost feel like it's their rite of passage, and it's it's wrong. Obviously, it doesn't work out for the best, for sure.
Yeah. And it's obviously that's the great tragedy of Nate as well, is that he's repeating these cycles that have been inflicted upon him. And that's also been interesting in terms of the dynamic with the other players, because he moved into this different position alongside them as part of the coaching team. And at the end of the day, he's also still working alongside people who were some of them quite vicious towards him in terms of their bullying. And so even though they're not discussing it, that behavior is not being exhibited by the players anymore, that's still always there in his mind. And that's still part of the fabric of the emotional interactions that he has with them. How did you want that to shape some of the dynamics, even if it's stuff that's very much under the surface for him, where he's still aware of it?
I mean, obviously there are bits and pieces that are obviously there in the writing, but I think it was always important to kind of have that playing at the back of the mind. I mean, the Colin one is a really good example, because I think there is a person who I think Colin genuinely has sort of redeemed himself in a way of that I think he genuinely does care for Nate and actually is proud of him when he gets promoted as a coach. And actually, I think all the players, even those who did sort of maybe belittle him, I think that they do realize the error of their ways. And actually come the end of season 1, I think from those characters' point of view, that has been put to bed. But I think, Nate almost sees it as payback time, to a degree. And so, yeah, I think when Nate effectively, singles Colin out and really belittles him in front of the others, and Colin does the right thing and comes to and approaches him to talk about it, and Nate just belittles him even more and makes him feel even smaller. He doesn't give an inch, does Nate, because it's not in him. He just doesn't. He's never really known that kind of, I guess, tolerance from anyone else really in his life, apart from Ted. And that it's partly explains his big issue with Ted is he feels that Ted was the only person to kind of empower him, and someone who really did just come along and just respect him for who he was. And now, Ted has his own reasons, but he just feels completely abandoned by Ted. So he's just utterly bereft. And I think, not that it excuses it, but it partly explains, why he has such a lash out at Ted right at the very end.
And he doesn't have anybody that he can really open up to. And, we see that in the club. And I was interested in how you saw his life outside as well. And if you felt like that was quite a lonely, isolating space for him as well, because even the moment where he goes into the restaurant to try and make a booking and he's like, I know Roy Kent, the currency of his position at the club doesn't carry over when he steps outside of those doors as well. And so that's something that he's feeling in the real world as much as when he's at work.
Completely. I mean, I think again, he feels that he was almost missold something by Ted in that respect, because Ted brought him up to be this, he really empowered him. You've been promoted, but, take him out, exactly as you say, take him out of that workplace. And actually it's same old Nate with his sort of stumbling sort of language and sort of tripping over his words and, very uncomfortable when it comes to kind of any, pretty straightforward, normal sort of social interaction. And he falls at the first hurdle. So, yeah. And it's really interesting though. I mean, this isn't any by any means a spoiler, but because we know that Nate has gone to West Ham at the end of season 2, and we're currently filming season 3. And so there is this sort of sense of isolation, like for Nate, because obviously I'm not at AFC Richmond anymore. And so, and as an actor, I've been trying to sort of use that, because obviously I'm not really seeing the people who I've been spending the past 2 years with as much as I was. And so there's a real sense of you say the word isolation, but that kind of loneliness. And of course I'm not really lonely because, everyone's still there, and we're still filming in the same sound stages and stuff. But it's just that I've been trying to use all that as much as I can in real life to try and sort of put some of that quality into Nate. But he's a lost soul for a large part. Well, for parts of season 1, but season 2, it's really highlighted just how lost he is and how vulnerable he is, I think, as well.
Right. And then with his dynamic with Roy Kent as well, there's also that dynamic of Roy has so many things that he wishes he had. He's able to look to his right, and it's now Roy's on the coaching team, has kind of taken the position that he had, so he's been bumped down further. The relationship with Keeley, the dynamic with the other players. And I wanted to ask about the scene where Roy comes back on the pitch, because, you know, Ted's obviously delighted to see him. They have their little rom-com exchange. Coach Beard finds that delightful and is very enamored with it. And then you and Roy don't say a word to each other. You know, Roy kind of like touches him on the back and you just nod at each other. And it felt like Nate had no idea that that was even a possibility, that he might be coming at that point. Was that kind of something that was very clear to you? Like, oh, he doesn't even know that this conversation happened and that he could have possibly.
Completely. I think it's the last thing he expects. And what episode is that? Episode 4? End of episode 4?
I think it's 5, because it's after the dinner.
Oh, okay. Yeah, of course it is. Yeah. Okay. So episode 5. Yeah. So, I mean, it's absolutely, Nate doesn't see that coming at all, but it's such a, he feels it's such a gut punch, because someone who, and I think that Roy and Nate's relationship, particularly in season 1, was a really wonderful one. There was like a real like older brother quality to Roy. He looked up to Roy as like an older brother. Roy is the one who stops the bullying, actually. He reprimands Colin and Isaac for bullying Nate, and so, Roy and, Ted in particular is that sort of beacon of hope in Nate's life in season 1. But Roy is absolutely there for Nate. And there's a lovely quality to that. And so I guess it's even sadder that Nate feels that sort of almost sense of betrayal, I think, because it's Roy. Because anyone else, or not anyone else, but wouldn't it have been wonderful if Nate had been really uplifted by Roy joining them and them working together, but actually his demons are already there, and he's seeing that as competition suddenly, even though you can't see past that. It's, oh, this is Roy, this is someone who was there for you. And even like the idea of just working as a team, which is obviously so much about what Ted Lasso is about. He doesn't see that. He just sees right past it, and all he cares about is himself and how that affects his position and what that means for him. And it just, it triggers a whole manner of things. And it's no coincidence by the writers that I guess the restaurant stuff, where he's doing all the spitting in the mirror and trying to make himself look tall and bigger and I guess more masculine, to try and sort of take control. And that episode is sort of absolutely undercut from Nate's point of view by the arrival of Roy.
And then there's also the complexity of Roy's response when he finds out that he kissed Keely. And, there's been that similar exchange that Keely had with Jamie, and Roy was angry but forgave him. And then with Nate, he's kind of like, it's all right. It's kind of a very non-reaction. And that, again, spurs something really interesting in Nate, because it also feels like, you played that scene in that moment in the immediate aftermath of like, he knows that he oversteps and he knows that he did something wrong and he really hates himself for having done that. And so it kind of feels like he wants Roy to berate him and punish him, because that's easier than him dealing with everything that he's saying to himself. And again, that inner demon was that kind of where you saw the trajectory of like, if he just hit me, it would be easier.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, that was so, and I remember we talked about that a lot, because when he kisses Keely, it's in episode 11, and then obviously this is sort of towards the start of episode 12, isn't it? So the season finale, and so I think that they were tinkering with that episode like right until the end. And I remember Brennan saying that they were considering the idea of, well, what if Roy is just really sort of almost dismissive of what happened, and and how from Nate's point of view that is so much worse, because it suddenly kind of massively devalues, or from his point of view, I mean, the main point to take from this is that he doesn't have any respect for Keely, which is dreadful. Keely's the one who should be, who everyone's feeling for at the moment. It's not Nate, and Nate shouldn't be so concerned with how that looks to him and why Roy isn't annoyed with him. He should be annoyed that, and really annoyed at the fact that he just massively overstepped the mark. But yeah, the fact that all he can take away from that is, I can't believe your boyfriend isn't more mad at me. It's sort of like, it's so selfish, and it really, typifies, I think, where, Nate's mindset at that point in his journey. I mean, he's really at rock bottom at that point, because we're in episode 12 territory. So, but yeah, it's deeply, it just kind of hammers home the shame even more. And I think it was a really good move of the writers to sort of do that, because there's possibly a reality to it that Roy doesn't feel threatened by Nate. He just doesn't, and so, and possibly even more than that, he still values Nate's sort of friendship and everything, you know, all the diamond dogs. You know, he values still Nate. I think Roy doesn't really want to see the nasty side to Nate. I mean, lots of people don't. It's only really Beard who kind of clocks it, you know, from episode sort of 7 onwards, and we can see that he's sort of seeing through this. And obviously Ted is, you know, not blissfully unaware, but he's completely unaware until, well, the end of episode 11. So yeah, I think it's just it's a horrible situation.
And this season as well, you know, also deals with a lot of the complexities of relationships with fathers. And when you go back and you look at the exchanges between Nate and his dad in the moment where he takes his parents out to dinner, there's actually very few words exchanged between them. We don't actually get to kind of have a full conversation between them. But the fact that his dad is staying very quiet, and when he says something, it's a criticism. It's don't whistle at me, I'm not a dog. Stop talking to the waitress, you know. We're good. We're getting the table. We're going to sit down and have dinner. Like, shut up, stop embarrassing me. And I feel like that in of itself said so much. And given that the writers are always kind of giving you those inklings of what's coming and details of his arc, particularly in season 2, how much did you know, and how early did you know that was a lot of the dynamic that was going to come to the foreground in terms of that familial relationship? Because again, the same as the dynamic with the bullying with players, that explains a lot of his actions.
Yeah, I knew enough. I didn't, you know, again, I didn't know, you know, all the exact details, but in terms of him having a difficult relationship with his dad, and that's, you know, that certainly formed a kind of a basis of those insecurities, and he's sort of slightly mollycoddled by his mum, and you know, just as a sort of starting point for Nate, I knew about that, and you know, I knew that we were going to be introduced, you know, see some of that backstory play out in season 2. But yeah, I mean, they're very fleeting, those moments to a degree with the family. I think you only see them in the restaurant, and then again once at his home after he's done his big win. And again, the dad just says, Nate's dad just says something quite condescending about, oh, they'll put anyone in the papers now. I can't remember the exact line, but where, you know, Nate's really sort of proud. Oh, I think that's what Nate says, actually, to try and bring his dad's attention to the newspaper. And you know, the dad says something about it going to Nate's head, which is actually true. but at that point, you know, Nate's not really receptive to what's true anymore, certainly not from his dad. So they're fleeting moments, but I think they're very effective, because again, there's a truth to it, sadly, but also I think there's a real sort of death by 1,000 cuts as well element to it. You know, you just know that this has just been Nate's life for, you know, forever. Just whatever he does, you know, there's always a slight put down at the end of it. And I generally don't know the answer to this, and I hope we kind of explore maybe more of that in season 3, because I think it feels like there needs to be some sense of resolution, whether it's positive or negative, with his dad.
And because of that being the relationship dynamic with his dad, you know, we understand why anything Ted says means so much to him in that way, because he really looks at Ted as like a parental figure at this point. And, you know, even when you were talking about his mom coddling him, you know, it's like his mom's still been buying him his clothes. And then Ted comes along and buys him that suit that he just keeps wearing and keeps wearing. But I thought the journey of the suit was quite interesting this season as well, because at you know, he's always worn it with a lot of pride. And then at the funeral, someone makes a comment and he's kind of embarrassed that he's wearing it, you know, and he's wearing a gray suit. Everyone else is dressed in black for the funeral, but that's the suit that he has. And the going out shopping with Keeley is kind of like just this shedding of this exterior. And so how did you kind of want to use something as simple as like a costume as like a real trajectory of his journey?
Well, just what's great, I mean, again, it's just all stems from the writing. You know, they're so kind of clued into everything. You know, there was a big conversation, you know, about this suit is going to absolutely, you know, the hair color change is going to track his downfall. His costumes are going to track his downfall. You know, he goes from Kitman to a tie to the grey suit that Ted gave him, and gave him in season 1, and then of course, when he feels he's starting to feel increasingly abandoned by Ted, he's almost wearing that suit ironically. You know, he doesn't wear it with pride anymore. You know, he's wearing it, and then as soon as someone picks up on it, he's straight to get it changed. And I guess there's no, you know, again, no coincidence that he just chooses this black Armani suit, this sort of suit of power, really. It's a proper kind of Darth Vader move, I think. And you know, it slightly mirrors Rupert and you know what Rupert wears, and there's, I mean, all that detail is just, I love that, because they're just all over it. And I mean, there are just a ton of those kinds of Easter eggs, when, you know, for every character as well, there is sort of, you know, just, and I can't go into the specifics now, obviously, but you know, some of the detail they've put in season 3, And there's just incredible design elements where I'm like, that's so good. And literally stuff for the fans to be like, oh, that was in that and that was there. And that makes sense. And just some really nice moments. Actually, one thing I can say, which is actually in season 2, when we talked about Nate's body language before, when we were talking about Keelan, he would often like kind of be holding like a fluffy pillow, and he's sort of almost a bit childlike. There was some really nice blocking that they did towards the end. Every time Nate was in Ted's office, and even like in some of the Diamond Dog scenes, or when they're discussing tactics and stuff, if you look, like Nate gets closer and closer to Ted's seat. Up until the in episode 12, when he's staring at the pyramid of success, he's literally stood behind his chair, and he looks at it as he walks past it. Ted comes in and he just moves out. He moves out of the way for him. But I remember them saying, "Oh yeah, no, we should." This is his. It's almost he's found his sort of power place, and he's kind of he's lording it over everyone. So there were lovely moments like that. I mean, that's all really fun as an actor as well, because that's just, people just really caring for what they do, and it makes good storytelling. It's nice.
It does, and similarly to the suit kind of meaning one thing to him and then becoming very different.
Yeah.
That's also the case in terms of how he responds to a lot of what Ted says this season, where he used to just like hang on every single word, like it was a gospel that he was hearing. And then it's even things like, when he's pitching a particular play, and even though Ted's like, yeah, let's do it, and he's always got a shtick where he doesn't really understand football still because he calls it the wrong name, even though his move is going to be used in the game, he's really angry about it, and just all these little like whimsical things that Ted says and does, like all of a sudden you're standing like 2 people down on the sidelines, just like giving him a real side eye for everything. Where did you kind of want to start bringing that in and kind of like gradually building that? Because again, it's like you can see those moments looking back, but it totally went over our heads at the beginning because we didn't know where things were going.
I think I mean, you can track them back quite far. I mean, there's one moment, must be in episode 4 or 5. Oh, it's probably in episode 5, isn't it? When they're talking about getting in a big dog to speak to Isaac. And, even when Nate offers himself up and Ted sort of like laughs at him. And usually that would be, that could be played as a complete joke for everyone to kind of get involved in. And for Nate to be like, oh yeah, no, I'm not the right person, or whatever he would say in sort of a season 1 kind of way. But he's really hurt by it, is Nate. And he effectively walks out and walks into his office and sort of sits down. And, he goes over Ted's head a little bit because Ted has got his own, issues that he's sort of dealing with. So I think it starts quite early on. And I think even there's even a bit, I think in episode 1, when I don't know if I can't remember if it made the final cut of what was on TV, not TV, Apple TV. Sorry, you know what I mean. But in the script, there's a bit where they're trying to think of ways to sort of incentivize Danny to sort of make him play better, I guess. And Nate just makes a sort of a casual remark about, well, he gets paid enough. Like he just says it like that. And I don't know. It's definitely in the script. I don't know if it made it for the edit, but and I remember, maybe they took it out because they thought it was too much too soon. But there was just this sort of little snipe, and so there were little sort of peppered remarks and kind of not agreeing with someone, but without saying anything. A lot of it's dialogue free, but a lot of just kind of sort of sitting back and observing and being like, So yeah, I mean, it's all in the right, it's all there in the scripts though. It's not, it wasn't me sort of improvising. Imagine if it was. I just improvised the whole character arc. They were like, all right, interesting way to go.
They're like, he was still Nate the Great, but somehow Nick did this.
All right. Okay, Nick, do what you like.
Also, when he's having that moment of trying to figure out how to assert himself and what that looks like for him, when he's in with Keely and Rebecca, and he kind of like starts from here and then he goes to shouting and he doesn't kind of like have that modulation of the middle space. And Rebecca's the one to be like, you don't have to shout to assert yourself, bring it down. There's a power in this place in the middle. Yeah. And I thought that was really interesting in regards to that confrontation with Ted, because he's not shouting, again, he's using that middle ground. Was that a very specific choice, or did you try different modulations? I know you only did a few takes of that scene.
We did like 2 or 3, I think, but it was never shouted. No, I think it was always decided that it was too far gone for that. I mean, there's a lot of expletives in it, which I think hold almost like more power, sadly, more aggression, because they're being delivered quite pointedly and quite, there's a real sort of pressure cooker kind of element to it. I've said before, but there's, he couldn't, the only place he could have gone further was to probably hit him, which would have been, obviously horrible. And not saying that what he says anyway is not horrible, but it's I think he's at peak sort of bad Nate at that point. But interestingly, I think also at his most vulnerable, because as much as all the horrible things he's saying to Ted and saying some home truths and really hurting Ted, I mean, you can really see, I think, how I hope that you can see it was all our hopes that we would make Nate look really vulnerable in that moment. And so I think him sort of saying it in a relatively measured way, but he's struggling. I mean, he's fighting back tears really in that scene rather than shouting. He just can't keep it together. And I love the fact that that's the only scene just between Ted and Nate in the whole season, which is crazy. Just that was the only two-hander between them in the whole season. And that's because they're so clever at writing, and they just sort of just drip and until it, and everyone sort of almost feels we just need to have this scene now, in the way that the characters are like, we just need to have this out now. It felt very cathartic and sort of genuinely upsetting to do it, but it felt like it needed it.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of that vulnerability and the fact that he's fighting back tears, he's trying not to break down in front of Ted, and even just there's such heavy, intense breathing of like trying to regain control, but his body kind of trying to escape from that. It is a conversation. He doesn't walk into Ted's office to confront him and to say all these things. He's trying not to say anything. He's keeping his back to him because he's already in that space. And Ted's the one that kind of pushes him like, what's up? Tell me. And so how did that influence a lot of the delivery as well? That this isn't something that he ever probably planned on saying out loud.
Well, I think he probably made the decision to go to West Ham by then, because I think Rupert had planted that seed in the funeral episode, in episode 10. And even though I don't know what, I know what Anthony said to me, but I don't know what Rupert said to Nate. I can sort of guess. I don't think it was a direct offer at that point of like coming with. I think it was a kind of a like, you're doing well, and I've, I'm here for you kind of thing. This, and it's horrible because Anthony's obviously not Anthony. Rupert is poisonous. He's this poisonous quality in the show in a great way, and Anthony's so great at that. And so I think it's at that half time point when they decide to continue with the false nine, and they all go up and do the believe sign, and Nate is just, he's made the decision at that point. So yeah, he was maybe planning to confront Nate possibly later, but certainly not at the point when it happens. And it possibly kind of explains all the kind of the mixed emotions, the sort of the tears, they're finally kind of getting to see everything that he wanted to say. His dad's in his head almost, saying what if they fail, and this was my idea. And I mean, he voices that quite explicitly. He says, and now you want to play my false nine. I've forgotten the exact words, but he accuses Ted of sort of going ahead with that so that it'll make Nate look stupid. I mean, he's just so paranoid at this point. And so, yeah, he's not with it, sadly. Poor old Nate. Troubled soul.
I'm glad that you were bringing up the fact that he'd already made the decision to go to West Ham at that point, because I was interested for you in that trajectory in those later episodes. Where do you feel like he made that decision where he was like, this isn't just something that's been planted as an idea, like I'm moving teams, I know it, and no one else around me knows this yet?
I think episode 12, I mean, I don't think it's that, I mean, like I say, there's something is planted in episode 10. And I think that's just more like, if you ever, on the lookout for another job, I'm always kind of here. And I don't think that Nate has necessarily even then the kind of full confidence to think, yeah, well, I'll just leave here and go. I think he's still, there's an element of hope possibly right until the end, and he goes and gets a new suit and then he blows it with Keeley, and then Roy not, caring kind of it's then a series, then quite quickly a series of things like, oh no, I know what I'm going to do to get out of this. I mean, I'd have to ask the writers really if they had in mind a specific point, but I don't think we wanted to, it certainly didn't want to kind of give it away too soon. But I think it probably has to be from when Rupert mentions it to him. It's as soon as that seed is planted, I think it's there really.
And what's so great again about the writing is how far in advance they know where they're taking things. And obviously you didn't know all of the details and the specifics of the how he was going to end up at this final place in season 2. But this is something that when you were filming the gala scene in season 1, that I think, Jason was sitting down and being like, this is where his journey's going, and this is where
seasons 2 and 3 actually. So broadly, he was like, and at that point, I don't even think 2 and 3 had been commissioned. So they've been very upfront about saying, just in general, that they've got the stories for the 3 seasons. Whether they do more or not, I genuinely don't know. But that they, at that point in the incarnation of the show, they knew, that they had 3 seasons worth of ideas and kind of character arcs. And they, very broadly outlined what Nate's was, and were absolutely true to their words, certainly with season 2, in terms of it kind of going to a much darker place and it being quite testing for the audience, I think, in that respect. And likewise for season 3. I mean, I know slightly less, because partly deliberate. I've kind of there's lots of rewrites and lots of kind of back and forth, but I, let them do their thing. And but the stuff that we've done thus far, I mean, obviously can't give anything away, but it's been very exciting and constantly surprising.
I mean, with that gift of knowing early on and having that much information, obviously, you didn't know, oh, he's going to tear up the believe sign, like the most sacrilegious image of the entire show at the end. But, in essence, you've taken this character who was someone who showed up with a suggestion box that his niece made covered in glitter to someone who's ripping up the believe sign. And so because you had a sense of where that's going, were there any elements or seeds that you all discussed even in season 1 starting to lay? Because, even with Toheeb's journey with Sam, there was like that detail of Sam holding Rebecca's purse at karaoke that was an interplay into their relationship in season 2. So were there any similar elements for you?
Yeah, well, there's one, in fact, in that, and it was off the back of that discussion where is partly because Jason and I were just sat next together in the gala for quite a long time. So when they were moving the cameras around, we'd just be chatting and stuff. And I remember in that episode ends, the gala episode. Is it 3 or 4? I can't remember. 3?
I can't remember. Yeah,
it's 3 or 4 in season 1, and it ends with all the players kind of getting up and sort of dancing, and everyone's sort of like, oh, this is great. And it was a choice to sort of remain seated. And you can see Nate, I haven't watched it in a while, episode, but you definitely see Nate just absolutely observing and not taking part. And I think that the idea was, the sort of superficial idea is like, oh, well, Nate's obviously too shy, he wouldn't kind of get up and dance. But actually we had a long conversation about how Nate has just seen Rupert come up and sort of take control of that gala and kind of completely sort of spin things. And we discussed how Nate had sort of observed that power play and sort of seen the sort of superficial results. And there's an element of Nate being like, I'm just going to take all this in and let this sit at the back of my head and rot for a season and a half, basically. But that was very deliberate. That was a conversation that we had really, really early on. And even though it's not played out, it's not explicitly played out at that point, but there are other, just other little signposts, even when he believes he's been fired at the end of season 1, he calls like Rebecca, he's like, oh, you shrew. It's like, well, hang on, why are you using language like that? He's really nasty, or he can be. It's just that we don't take it, we take it on the head, because we take it on the chin, because, oh, it's Nate, it's little old Nate, he sort of does a funny little dance. And but he's got these demons, sadly. They only come to the forefront really in season 2.
I mean, that's the brilliance of the character, that we love so many things about him, even when he's exhibiting certain behaviors like that. And, the detailing that you've brought forth in your performance from the writing is really, really great. And I hope that we get to see a more positive return for Nate in season 3. Thank you so much, Nick.
We'll have to see. Thank you so much. Cheers. Lovely to speak.